everyone, and welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest, the podcast where us four backlot boys view and review every single Palme d'Or winner. My name is Timo. I'm, of course, joined by Abram, Tucker, and Tanner. And today we have the 1983 winner of the Cannes Grand Prix. That is the Ballad of Narayama, directed by Shohei Imamura, out of the country of Japan. This is a Japanese movie. This is a family drama about a little village up in the middle of nowhere in the middle of Japan in the 1800s, and they live like it's the 1400s. We're going to talk about it. We're going to discuss this film, but first, we've got to remind you not only of what our new show is, because if you're new, this here Quest for the Bestest is the second iteration of the show, in which the first time we honed and refined the format with every single Best Picture winner, which you should check out the complete series. Link is in the description. But now we are checking out every single Cannes Palme d'Or winner because they just seem so awesome and so intriguing. Last week, we kicked off the show with a banger of a movie that is going to be very difficult to live up to because we all love it, actually. It was Parasite from 2019, Bong Joon-ho's film, and it got a very, very high score. In fact, it went to the top of the list. Now, I don't
really?
there's one film on the list, but it also went to the top numerically because it got like a 9.9, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Out of 10.
That's pretty hard to beat. I think this show will be all about finding a film that comes close. So, today,
Truly.
with the Ballad of Narayama, I would like to hear some first impressions about this here movie, because I had no idea about what it was going to be when I went into it. And, well, I discovered as I went along. But what did you guys think? What do you have to say about this film? Anyone wanna go first, or shall I call a name?
Pick one out of a hat. We don't
Okay.
really do that. Usually someone volunteers, but I like the idea of you directing us.
Okay. Well, here's my hat.
Phenomenal.
Abram, you go first.
Little prop humor.
I go first.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What? That's not how that works. You pick out of the
I
hat.
pulled his name out of the hat. I pulled his name out of the hat.
This is a really interesting film because, as will be the refrain, none of us were familiar with it before watching.
Yeah. It's
And
the refrain from most of the show.
great point. Here's what I usually do, right? I watch a movie, and then immediately, because my brain has been broken by the app, I open up Letterboxd, and I log it, I score it, I put it in my silly little list, and I go on with my day.
Bada bing, bada boom.
Bada bing, bada boom. I didn't do that this time because upon finishing The Ballad of Narayama, I really didn't know what to think, and I still don't, in large part. I think it's a very interesting film, and I was doing just a little bit of reading about like secondary analysis of the film, and then I decided I don't want to do this. I'd rather
You want
come
secondary
to
analysis from us.
I'd rather come to Quest a little bit unsure and work through it with you boys, because ultimately
We'll have a come to Quest moment.
a come to Quest moment, the first of hopefully many. That's very good. I found this film beautiful and unnerving, but also very difficult to really connect with emotionally. I think I was much more interested in it sort of formally than in sort of the character dynamics or really the contents of the plot, which is in some ways meandering, in some ways quite focused. And so I'm excited to dig into it because I think that this is no doubt a good movie for sure, with a lot for us to kind of sink our teeth into, as though we are a snake eating any number of small creatures, as you see throughout this movie.
Yeah.
But I just don't think that I felt any sort of really real emotional spark or connection to it.
Sure.
Who dareth
That man.
follow that with uppeth?
You
Me?
gotta fill out the hat thing. Come on. You can't just drop the hat thing far away.
Oh, okay.
We're going back to the hat.
Tanner.
Sure. So, in the previous iteration of Quest for the Bestest, we threw around the phrase "slice of life" quite a bit, and that phrase is often thrown around quite a bit in typical film discussion as well. So much so that I feel like it's maybe been diluted down to just like people doing things in a movie is slice of life. Like, if it's not about like murderers or superheroes or a government conspiracy, it's a slice of life movie. And perhaps I'm going to do that right here. But I think Imamura's Ballad of Narayama is very much a slice of life movie because it chronicles a year in like just the interpersonal connection of this village and juxtaposes it with, as Abram had just briefly mentioned, these nature shots, whether it be animals eating each other, animals having sex, animals giving birth, what have you. It really juxtaposes the moments of human interaction with similar moments of like natural or animalistic interaction or events or something like that. And I think it's very clear in why it's trying to do that and what it's trying to say in that juxtaposition. Because it is, as Abra mentioned again, quite unnerving and violent, but it also can be quite tender and beautiful in moments. It sort of runs the gamut of human emotion in a way that I find very interesting. Because yes, you don't get to know any singular character very well, but I think the relationships between them become evident. And that's what I found so fascinating. And it is that like chronicle of a year and, sort of looping back around to the harsh winter in this village that really connects the whole thing and makes it feel very naturalistic, I'll say.
Very nice, Tanner. Tucker, do you want to go or shall I go? I want to go.
You know what? Then I'll let you. How about that?
I think you're right, Tanner, that it's a circle. It's kind of a slice of life or a circle of life film, but I found myself being drawn to its discussion and ponderings, I'll say, on death and how death
Sure.
is a very important feature of the film. Many people die throughout it, and there's previous characters' deaths that our main characters are thinking about, and so. Well, I found myself kind of drifting between just kind of, looking at the movie and then actually being interested. There were parts that really like dragged me in and pulled me in and made me very close, I guess, with the film. Not necessarily the characters or the emotion, but I felt like I was really, seeing the film for all it had. And I think it is kind of a deep meditation on death and dying and why people die. What are the reasons for death? And this film, I think, posits a lot of different reasons for people dying and a lot of the reactions that this small community has to them. So I think that we don't get a huge amount of character study, but we also, the stuff that we do get is humorous. It's sad, but it's also, I think it is quite real. And I really found myself thinking a lot about nature and the changing of the seasons. This film is one of the best at just subtly pulling us along through the year by showing how the natural environment changes over the course of each season. And it's just beautiful. Like, this is a really nicely shot film, I'll say.
Yes.
A lot of these like very simple shots, but you just have a close up or a chest up kind of shot and beautifully lit with just this totally green or white or multicolored, depending on the season, background of leaves and foliage and mountains, which really I think is what is at the heart of the film, the mountain.
Oh, that's
True.
a good point. Yeah. I like this movie. I think that the fact that it is so different is from what we as Americans and through the big budget movies that we consume and watch every single day. The fact that this is so different is what makes it so exciting to dive into the Cannes Film Festival winners, the Palme d'Or winners. I think I find this movie filmically interesting in terms of the ways that it shakes up and a normal plot progression and normal character arcs, because it can basically completely eschews that for the most part. And where I find myself gravitating towards is two things that this movie does very well and very differently from other movies. One of them is what Tanner mentioned already, is the juxtaposition between nature and humanity and the ways that those mirror each other. I mean, and I certainly wanted to get into the shots that mirror each other and the fact that they're so intertwining character relationships with constant shots, even sometimes during conversation, of nature, whether that be animals or just foliage or environments. And the other thing is that this movie is just, I struggle to say it's super realistic, because I think it pushes itself and its characters and its themes so much towards the darker sides of humanity that it almost becomes overbearing. The amount of times that you get like genuine moments between characters is usually because they're trying to lie and get something from someone else, or get laid, or like weasel their way out of something. And
But
every
Tucker,
character in this movie,
ain't that life, Tucker?
Ain't that just how
not
it
in my
is?
experience.
Okay.
I'm just speaking myself here.
Yeah,
I'm not usually lying to people. I'm not
maybe,
usually
like,
trying to get laid.
If you have a cynical view of humanity, maybe.
Sure, yes,
Sure,
but I would say that the amount to which this film focuses on the darker things that humans can do is what makes it feel very distinct, and what makes this cast of characters so like unnervingly compelling to watch. You're always like, this person's about to hurt them, or they just hurt someone else and they're hiding it, and it makes it like really awkward. And I sent a message to a friend.
They're all tenuously related too. Like they're all kind of a part of the same family.
Yeah, because they're all in a small community, and there's a lot of closeness going on there. But I sent a message to a friend. This kind of sums up my thoughts on this movie, and this is mostly a joke, but it's also true. Is if you like rape, bestiality, self-mutilation, voyeurism, abuse, theft, elder abuse, child murder, and corporal punishment, then the Ballad of Narayama may be for you. Because all of those things happen in this movie, and every few minutes you just get another thing that someone should probably go to jail for. But there's no jail here. There's some burying alive as a punishment. But there's no jail here because they live in a village where there's like 20 people. But it's a messed up movie. And that's really what my mind ends up focusing on. I was like, all these characters are, I don't want to be around them. They're probably going to hurt me. Yeah. But it made it really compelling to watch.
Well, I think that's actually a really interesting place to start, because there's certainly, I would say, sort of a dispassionate lens through which you view a lot of what happens in the film, because a lot of the relationships, even if you view them as being perhaps overly pessimistic and sort of the tapestry they might present to these characters, it's basically a lot of dynamics that all center around survival, decisions made for survival. Survival as it means in terms of having enough food, in terms of reproducing, in terms of habitat, in terms of various things. And in that lens, I think that the natural photography, the very obvious, Tanner, to your point, Tanner, interlinking of our human characters and our sort of random animals is not only sort of a mirroring of behaviors, but I think it's also kind of to almost put us as viewers in the mode of, in some ways, watching a kind of perverted nature documentary.
Sure.
But it's about a town.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You're basically like looking out into this fishbowl, and I think that's part of why I find myself not particularly moved by the film emotionally, because there's a very good argument for that maybe not even being the point, and the point more being the pressures put upon these people and what they do when these pressures appear, when the potato crop isn't big enough, when there are kids and there's going to be too many mouths to feed. And the answers to these questions are pretty disturbing. But I think that ultimately, for better and worse, the film is trying to have us think through that lens, so maybe almost a more like anthropological lens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and thus the intercutting of our animal and our natural, images makes us maybe think that the humans are a bit closer to the animal, or to at least you made it seem so in my mind that we need to see these images to understand almost the direness of the situation. That a couple of times there's dialogue that reinforces just how brutal it is to live in this village, but that's kind of this underpinning throughout the whole film, is that life isn't easy. And I think that's what the line they use is, life is not easy here, and so everyone is making decisions based on living, which I think we as modern humans in an electrified and insulated world don't think about at all. And so how do our relationships evolve when that is our primary focus and goal? It's and you're right, it's really disturbing what they end up doing. It's mostly killing. How do you solve there being too many people? You kill some.
And that's what I was talking about when I said, it kind of depends on your view of humanity if you think this film is like overly cynical or not. I did do a little bit of research because this film is based on a 1956 novel and was already adapted into a film before this in 1958. That film's in the Criterion Collection, so if you're doing a Quest watch along, make sure that you didn't watch that one by accident. This is the 1983 version by Shohei Imamura.
Luckily, these movies all have a nice title card at the beginning that says it
Yes,
won the
that's
Palme d'Or, and you're like, okay, good. At least we're
Yes.
somewhat on track.
This isn't your grandpa's Ballad of Narayama.
It is not.
It's your father's Ballad of Narayama.
I did do a little research, and the one that is in the Criterion Collection, the 1958 version, is a bit more. I'll say it's not as bleak. Let's say that. And
like
whether that be
plot-wise?
Yeah, plot-wise, let's say. It potentially focuses on not as many of the dark elements of the original novel as this version does. And I think that's a lot of time. I think that is a lot up to Imamura's perspective and his direction as a filmmaker. Because just doing some light reading about his work as well. Apparently, it is a lot about like the visible and invisible laws that bind humanity in our drive to break them. So I think he is sort of a cynical filmmaker when it comes to the human condition, let's say. And that totally comes across in everything that's seen here. Because should we get into the plot and sort of name a couple of the awful things that happen in this film?
Yeah.
Well, the plot's really simple, and I think that's probably where Aaron was talking about it being complex but also very focused, is the story as it's actually important to be presented is that an old woman is about to die, and in this village, when people reach the age of 70, or she's not about to die, actually, she's fine.
She's quite healthy.
She's turning 70. They take a journey up to the top of a mountain and die of starvation at the top of this mountain. And the film follows a year in the life of a family. They've got like 3 sons and some wives and some people that maybe should be wives, but they're cheated with. Is a whole thing. A year in the life of this family as they basically try to convince the matriarch of the family that no, you don't need to go up to the mountain. Like, you're fine. Like, you're gonna be okay. And the entire year she's like, nah, I'm going soon. And that's basically it. And then she goes, they go to the top of the mountain at the end of the movie. And then it ends. So really, that is what's important. But the movie is always taking that middle path and then adding a branch to it, and then that branch adds another branch. It's like, okay, well, the brother that's supposed to be like helping her in this way has a new wife, and the other brother wants to get laid. The other brother,
and he's really stinky,
raped his girlfriend, and now there's a baby. It's like there's just a bunch of different little things that like distract you from the main plot, but it creates this branching, spidering web of like, who's doing what to who, and how's this going to impact him? Who's lying to who? It's the whole fucking thing.
So where do we want to start here? Do we want to focus in on Orin, who is technically our main character, Orin and her oldest son Tatsue? Should we start there?
To me, that their relationship is what gets me thinking a lot. The family of thieves is the other part that really sticks out to me, because those are the two things about death and dying. I guess though, starting with the eldest son and the mother, there's this early off-screen. How do we describe it? The father is missing. The old woman's husband disappeared long ago, and they kind of wonder where he is. And it's revealed at the end of the film that, in fact, the son killed the father. What did you guys make of that? Because I'm kind of like, well, the child killing the parent is something clearly that we're supposed to understand. But what about this father, this business here at the beginning, or in the prehistory of this story? I'm not sure what to make of it yet, really.
Well, it's also interesting that it's the son killing the father, but then consistently throughout the film, where the father is most prevalent throughout the film is that Tatsuhei has grown up to look basically exactly like his dad, and people are constantly confusing him for his dad. So I don't know what that means thematically, but the fact that he killed someone that people continue to like, hey, aren't you that guy? Or I thought I saw that guy. I was like, oh, it's just me. It's like he's killing himself.
Oh, I see. Okay. But I think there's lines about how Tatsui's father, Rie, I made sure to write down character names, was a bit of a deadbeat dad, I think is how we're supposed to understand him. Lost a lot of the family's money gambling, and now they're in a very poor position because they're only down to one elderly parent.
And also just not an honorable person, because he didn't follow through with the tradition of taking his mother up the mountain.
So I think there is that there is sort of an interplay with the like societal expectation of a mother and a father, and how he wasn't living up to that role. He wasn't fulfilling the typical roles of a father, and therefore he must be punished, and Tucker potentially subsumed by the oldest son, taking his position, even taking on his appearance.
And also being abusive like his dad.
Exactly.
Yes, well, that runs in this village.
Uh-huh.
Is there anyone who's not abusive in some way?
Not that comes to mind, no.
Even the little kid, kind of shithead.
Yeah.
There's an exchange where, how do you say his name? Risuke, the stinky brother.
Risuke, yeah.
Risuke and Orin are having a conversation after Risuke has been abused, but rightfully so. I think this is after he committed bestiality, although I get his many misdeeds a little confused in my head. But
sure,
he's just gotten the shit beat out of him by Tatsuke for doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this conversation where Orin is talking about how, yeah, your father used to beat me, and it's only the people who are gutless, I think is the word used, that will beat up somebody else. Yeah. And I think what's interesting, it's interesting, again, if we're thinking about the movie kind of through this paradigm of death, as you were saying, Timo, because the oldest son even remarks out loud in the narrative that I killed my father and now I'm killing my mother too, as he is ceremonially carrying her up the mountain. And I think, unless I was misinterpreting the dialogue, taking her further along that journey than he was supposed to.
Yeah, it seems like he does take her to a place where there's no more path to climb up, essentially.
Yeah. They arrive at the one scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail where the rabbit killed him.
I want to talk about that scene as well. But yeah, to your point, Abram, I think it's definitely like she was supposed to take some of that journey on her own, but he just takes her all the way there.
Yeah,
it's
almost in the most Death Stranding-esque section of a movie I've ever seen.
in like a very maybe repentant way for his father, who didn't take his mother at all.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because as we learn and in the traditions of the village, it is just sort of assumed that you're going to take your parent and then they're going to die. But the eldest son is, in some ways, it feels very reticent to do this, which stands in direct contrast, because you're saying, Timo, that we ought to talk about the thieving family, but I think we also ought to talk about who I'm sure was given a name, but I'm not remembering it at all. The other young man of the village who has tied his father up and can't wait for his father to die. And so there's this interesting sort of like split philosophy on death that I think the film is illustrating. Almost death through necessity, like a death through necessity, a death sort of at the hands of like a senseless violence, a death of ritual, and then kind of like a longing for death in some ways. And so I think that just in this like parental relationship, I think we see a lot of different and competing understandings of what the loss of life means. For as much as the film is concerned with birth, I think in death, it also gives us a lot of almost different philosophies to pick between. And I'm not even necessarily sure which the film ends up favoring in the end.
I think we'd have to know a little bit more about Shohei Imamura to like really definitively know how he felt about it while he was creating it.
But Abram, you make me think that the flip side of all this death talk is, and it seems to me, if I'm trying to recall what the content of the large parts of the film are, it's a lot about sex, and it's a lot about these characters' insane drive to get laid, and which results in some.
All three of the brothers are either have easy access to sex because they have a wife, or can't get it at all, and that's like the only thing they have to talk about.
Yeah, and so if half the film is so obsessed with like life going away, then the other half of the film is obsessed with the very beginning of human life as well. And so and it takes these, I think, just like you say, it has the different philosophies and approaches on death. It takes the same thing on like birth and life reproduction in the various different ways that characters do end up having sex in the film.
Yeah. Well, actually, I haven't thought about that because I agree that obviously it's a very big theme. Sex, the act of procreation, is a huge theme in this movie. Basically, all the main characters are interested in it or want to do it in some way. But it also is on like a character basis is pretty cold towards that. All the characters that do engage in sex are doing it for either very cynical reasons, like the one woman in the village who goes around and sleeps with everyone. She's not interested in it at all. She's just doing it to appease her husband who recently died, or the old woman who ends up having sex with Risque at nearing the end of the movie, or
presumably because no one else will have sex with her anymore.
Yes, true.
She's
And
a widow or something.
he's refusing to work until he has sex. Essentially.
He's gonna kill the horse.
He's gonna kill the horse.
Absolute
Save the
king.
horse.
He's on strike.
It's true. Yeah, I think I said something to that effect when we're watching it. But we also never see a baby get born.
Exactly.
Even though there are two pregnant women in this movie, one of them is buried alive until subsequently their baby dies as well. But also, I've got her name down actually. Tamayan, the wife, Tatsuhei's wife from the village across the way, she is pregnant. But we never see her give birth. And there's also barely any children in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see this focus on sex to be a really like face level in terms of how the characters view it and how the filmmaking portrays it to be a very base level. Like procreation is something very important to these characters, but the act of giving life is very not focused on in this movie.
and
we don't see children.
procreation causes problems for them. It causes
yes.
That's kind of the source of a lot of the drama is all the different problems that sex causes. More babies.
Yeah. I think it's exactly what Timo was talking about. It is about that like very beginning of human life, and it is something more animalistic that we're meant to read from the act of sex in this film.
It's not the passionate motherly fatherly. I'm gonna raise a kid and can't wait to like see them grow.
Yes, it is not at all. There's no passion to be found in the act of it here.
And even the children that are in the movie, especially that really small one that's just kind of hanging around, I'm pretty sure it's implied that's not a biological child of anyone in the family. It's just some other kid.
Maybe.
It seemed to me that there's something about the salt merchant.
And they're maybe looking to sell her as well.
Yes, there is
exactly.
Selling of children in this film.
Well, quite the opposite. Tucker, the only baby we see is dead, and it becomes uncovered when the snow begins to thaw. And then there's this just like a very frank discussion of like, well, whose baby was it? Not like in a sad
why
or
are you
like
leaving babies in my field?
Ways. Yeah, he's like, get these dead babies out of my field, dude.
It's messing up my vibe.
It's very matter of fact in the way it addresses all of these things, and even in the way if we can circle back around to death for a moment, I find it very interesting how Avery, you brought up how there's all the different attitudes towards death that are sort of displayed in various characters, and it's all framed through this like ritualistic act of going to the top of a mountain when you turn 70 years old and sort of resigning yourself to death so as to not be a burden to your family. It's very interesting what we're supposed to read from that. And because that's a very unnatural way of dying. That is, when you turn 70, you go up there, you die. That's it.
It's like Midsummer.
No matter how healthy or sick you are, you go up there. It is a hard set timer on life in this village. And it's fascinating because that's not how death works at any other place in the entire world.
Or in the rest of the movie.
Exactly. You don't know when you're going to die. It could be a fucking mob breaking into your home and taking your entire family and burying them in a hole. It could be from disease. It could be from this or that or the other thing. But what we're supposed to read from about death in the film comes through a very unnatural lens.
I think that ultimately this film is very good at provoking us to sort of think about tradition in a lot of ways, because to speak to that point, Tanner, about death, but also again to speak about birth for a second, that when you think about our culture, especially if you think about, just follow me for a second, a
Okay.
more traditionally conservative understanding that giving birth is amongst your highest duties as a person in society, etc. When you look in the animal kingdom, there's no shortage of animals that give birth and then eat the babies, abandon the babies, treat them dispassionately, and then the sort of mammals and others that take very good care of them or whatever. But in this film, I think it asks us to challenge. I don't think it's asking us to think maybe we should sell our own children when we have them, but I think it's asking, at least for a moment, to invite this very dark idea of deprogramming our sort of like reverence for giving birth and bringing children, because essentially children here, and there's even a moment when a couple is lying down being like, oh man, if we have a girl we can sell her, isn't that great?
Yeah. Or they talk multiple times about how once there's another baby, someone else is gonna have to leave because there's gonna be too many mouths and we're gonna have enough food.
Right. So it is a very, I don't want to say inhuman, but maybe unhuman impulse that they have for children. But to your point, Tanner, there's also an equally provocative and in some ways unhuman approach to death. And so I think we can very easily make observations about how both are handled in the movie, but I think really the takeaway, at least for me, is why is it this way in the narrative? Why is it this way in our real life? I don't think I'm gonna go about telling my dad when he turns 70, okay, we're gonna go climb Mount Katahdin and I'm gonna leave you there. But I think it's an interesting concept for the film to broach. What if death or birth are things that are foreign to us and how they're treated?
Well, it's interesting that you say foreign, because I would not use that word, because this movie is all the characters are very focused on birth and death. They're very experienced with it as well. It's not foreign to them. And basically everyone they know is dead or dying. And they have got plenty of people they know that have died recently or died a long time ago, and they're always talking about that. So I wouldn't say that death is foreign. I think unnatural in the way that we, as Westerners who don't take our kids up the mountain and have a different view of religion and life than people in Japan, the way that we view these themes is through a very different lens. But this group of people is as like a microcosm of a different kind of ideals. It's something that's, frankly, less foreign to them than it would be to us. I know maybe 2 people that have died in my life. I don't really think about death. I never prepare for it. And we're at the age where we're not really thinking about life other than our own. We're not getting ready to have children or anything. So I think what makes this movie so interesting to me is that it isn't foreign to them. It's very familiar. Most of their life, especially as you were talking about, really the way that I'm starting to view this film as we start to analyze it is through the lens of survival, which survival is literally just the cycle of life and death, birth and dying. And that's all they're concerned about. And that's mostly what every single sequence of this movie is concerned about. And I think the reason why I view it as more cynical and kind of dark is that there are chances for this movie to show happy things happening, but we stray away from them, or they're messed up with in some way. We could have seen Tatsue and Tamayan have a wedding because they are getting married, or the first time that they meet, or the first time that they make love or something. These could have been happy moments, but the movie chooses not to show those. I think maybe it's their wedding where they're like hammering the post in the ground, like gets all messed up and everyone's like running around like screaming and
Yeah,
stuff.
oh yeah, because Oren shows up with after she has busted her
with her
teeth out.
yeah.
There are these two oh god, I can't stand this. Continue, Tucker.
But the other one would be this festival that they're having on the day that Tamayan arrives. And it's something that people are preparing for. They're like preparing some food and like getting things ready, but we never see that. It's like we cut to the next day and like, someone's fucking a dog. And like the movie chooses to skip over the happy moments, which makes me really, really read it in a like cynical and dark light.
Yeah, absolutely. There was something. Okay, I want to talk about let's say the third act of this film, because I think it flies by pretty quick actually, because we're very focused in that third act.
What are you considering the third act of this film? Because I don't think this film ascribes to third act structure super hard.
Let's say the final phase, which is as Tucker said, the journey up the mountain. To close out the film, it's the ultimate thing that we've been looking forward to. Well, not looking forward to, but you get what I mean.
Dreading
since the beginning of the film.
Oren has
been looking forward to it.
And because she's ostensibly our main character, I'd say we're kind of supposed to like.
Okay, so it starts with the scene in which the elders, the male elders of the tribe, deliver the rules of this ritual. I think it's a really baller film choice to be like, no talking.
Yeah.
That makes for this.
It's a very cool choice.
That is a very interesting and creative choice that forces this to be a very eerie and tense and a very, ultimately, very heartbreaking, I think, sequence when we arrive at the end of it finally. But just from a mechanical, like how the film now works for the next 30 or so minutes, nobody's saying anything to each other.
Well, no, because Tatsuhei breaks that rule a ton of times. And he's
as Tucker and I mentioned, I think the rule is that Oren cannot talk. Tatsuhei can talk, but Oren cannot. I believe is maybe how it works, because she doesn't seem like pissed off at him when he talks or whatever. No. She's just like kind of is listening and nodding, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, you do get that like 10-15 minute sequence where there is no dialogue exchanged, and that really serves as a moment for you to sort of drink in the beautiful natural world that our characters are hiking up and through. Apparently this was filmed in like a mountainous Japanese region for a full year. They filmed as well, so to capture the full cycle of seasons naturally. So yeah, very cool, beautiful stuff. Hiking through that wilderness there, but Imamura can't help but give us a nasty thing, like when his toenail rips off or whatever. Yeah.
I felt
Can't
that.
help it.
I felt that in my toe for the rest of the movie. I was like, ugh.
Still feel it to this day.
But it ends in, as you mentioned, Timo, this beautiful interpersonal character moment that is again done entirely wordlessly, where it's only Oren and Tatsuhei embracing and sort of looking at each other and just like being near each other and not saying anything, and it like really it's like the most heartfelt moment of the entire film. And maybe it's just because the film starves you of that feeling for 2 hours, and you're like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed in my entire life. It is this wordless goodbye between a mother and son who have a complicated relationship, let's put it at that. But like at the end of the day, he's saying goodbye to her for the last time. And of course, that's not true towards the end of it, but it is this beautiful moment that I loved so much.
It's so, I find it, yes, it is beautiful. I agree, but it doesn't begin beautifully. It begins very disturbingly and very eerily when we arrive at this final place that Tatsuhei is not, I guess, supposed to go to or supposed to see, and we start seeing some skeletons laying on the ground, but then it just becomes more and more and more, and we even get a little jump scare with the ravens inside the chest cavity of someone who's dead, who's died, and all these different stages of people who died recently and who died a long time ago. And you look around and I just thought, there's hundreds of bodies here, and they're all just out in the open. The way that I'm thinking of it now, evil characters, right? The film posits characters that are not good, that are not just, or what's the honorable. The dishonorable character group of family member, the family that steals the food, gets buried alive. Whereas the honorable Orin dies sitting out in the open in the snow to be unburied for the rest of time.
At the top of a mountain in the most exposed place humanly possible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
No
extreme.
defense
It's
from the
extremely
elements.
like bright and white out because of the snow and the of course
It's just started
the
snowing.
yeah the
specifically.
the Amaya family, I believe, is the one who are buried, or the Amaya family. That's done in like the dead of night, obviously, as well, in the middle of a dark forest. So yeah, I think there's definitely something there. Yeah.
I think it's also interesting how I found the ravens to be not only quite visually compelling,
Ears wise too.
Yes.
Ears wise, it's also an interesting last sequence because the sound design is very spare for a lot of it.
For a long time.
But what I found really interesting about the ravens is that this is like a human and animal becoming sort of intrinsically interlinked. Whereas before it was really only sort of shown through editing this relationship for the most part. You know, there's a lot of times throughout the film I kept waiting, like, okay, we keep cutting to these snakes and things. When is a snake going to bite somebody? But it usually it doesn't. I mean,
There's no-
it really is. It's a filmic suggestion. The link.
There is
No,
human animal violence, but it's just animal abuse, not
Yeah.
the fighting.
Yeah.
Abram, I had a fascinating this isn't like specific to the film, but it's just like a cultural thing. It's just like, oh yeah, the snakes are like not shown to be like dangerous or bad in any way. I'm like,
hanging out.
that's interesting because it's like, oh yeah, because we were fucking founded by God-fearing Christians who the serpent was the origin of evil and the fucking embodification of the devil and evil in a like our lore essentially. In American history and Western history, that's
Love
what
to
we
read that lore Bible.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Tucker, drop the lore, buddy.
It's clear.
And that like I was just like an interesting like thing that like occurred to me. It was like, oh yeah, obviously they might have that same association, but why would they? Because it's only in like Christian literature that like snakes are evil and they should be feared. There's that like cultural understanding of them. It's an interesting thing.
Yeah, it is, and it also just gets me out of my perspective of being horribly afraid of snakes.
Yeah,
in general.
me too.
So
I was
it's,
like
it's a
seeing
good reminder.
seeing
but-
those bastards slither around. I'm like, "Yee."
but I think the film very openly evokes this sort of like sublime reverence for everything that the people have built. Ultimately, it comes to its dissolution, even if it is a more open and honorable and beautiful death. There is still the horror that registers on our characters' faces because this is a film that is very subtly well acted. That this is what we're going to become, and we're going to end up being with the birds. And we have walked into a grave. What it is, and it's very interesting. An unburied grave, essentially, is where these people pass, and they pass to become a perch for a bird, or to become buried in snow.
if you go peacefully, but the film shows us
Yes.
this film is full of yin and yang. It shows us the other side. If you don't go peacefully, you get thrown off a cliff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting moment.
That was a fucking rough scene. There's a couple just like I think this film the phrase I really keep returning to for this film is matter of fact. Because, you know, that it is that like brutal act of that old man bound with twine tumbling down a mountain, or the family getting buried in the dead of night, or returning to like the scene of them coming upon the field of skeletons. Only minutes before that, Oren was talking about, oh, our family has been coming here. People from our village have been coming here for hundreds of years to do this. It's so beautiful, and you know, it's so honorable.
But then,
and then
you
are
get
like,
there and you're like, oh,
you are confronted
shit.
with the reality of that. You're like, oh, this is horrifying. And it's very matter of fact in that. Like, what, you know, we can like dress up the act of dying in whatever way we'd like to, with religion, with ritual, what have you. But Imamura shows us, he's like, you just turn into a skeleton, pal. That's what happens.
Yeah. You're on a mountain exposed to elements. What the hell do you think's going to happen?
Exactly, yeah.
It's also interesting because if we think about these two pairs, mother and son and father and son, on one side we have a mother who is very, as we see, accepting of this being her end as we return to her praying.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a son who is reticent to let go, who runs back in what I think is one of the most emotional moments of the film to just see his mother one more time and try to enjoy the snow together. But then you have a son who just wants the old man to be fucking dead and buried
Get out
already.
of his life, yeah.
Or Monty Python the Holy Grail imagery. I want to point out.
Tucker, keep Monty Python in mind for when I talk about some things later in the episode.
And then we have the father who's not ready to go. And it's interesting to watch these dynamics play out. One is very sympathetic and one certainly isn't. But there's a moment that I really like with Tasuhei when he's watching the father get thrown down the mountain. And it's hard for me to know, really, when you're looking at what's registering on his face, what he feels, whether he's feeling in anger at the son, a disappointment at the father's refusal to let go, a sort of externalizing of what he is forcing himself to do to his mother. It's very complicated. I think that, Tanner, you're totally right that this is a film that presents images in a very matter-of-fact way, but I think that there's a lot of subjectivity on the faces of certain characters.
Sure.
It's a very well acted film. I think we get a lot out of what these people, how they say lines, what they look like, how they look at each other, and this is a thing I've noticed, especially in a lot of Japanese films, but that body language really is exaggerated a lot, in a very helpful and understanding way. In Western films, body language can be a very concealed, very like neutral thing, but in this film, it's very played up, and I find that to be very common across lots of Japanese cinema. Risuke is the main character that I think of for being in a more comical way, but I think that that's really shown through a lot of the film, especially with, I'm thinking about hefting the mother up the mountain as a very physically acted part of the film too.
I want to talk about, 'cause I guess did anyone have any other notes about Oren and Tatsue at the end of the film or throughout the rest of the film? Because we probably should talk a bit more about the other characters, the side characters as well.
Yes.
Sure.
I want to talk about Risuke. The stinky boy, the stinky lad that he is.
Boy, he's so stinky. Oh my god.
He is stinky and smelly.
Let us forget that.
They will not. He's a social outcast and is the comic relief of the film. I kind of grew to understand that. I was like, oh, we're just injecting comedy into this movie as well, which is fascinating to me for all that we've been talking about of how this film is so upfront and matter of fact about life and death and human brutality. It's just like, also this guy fucking reeks and no one wants to fuck him.
It's true.
It even comes around at the end when we get that old woman whose nose doesn't work anymore to be like, okay, fine, I'll sleep with him, whatever. if you really want me to, I guess. And then the fact that he's just like, we keep getting back to them, like he flops off of her and they rustles around in the hay and he's like, okay, time to go again. Like he's just, because he's never had sex before. It's just it's very classic comedic stylings that are just in this movie as well, and it works. It can at times feel so foreign from the rest of the film, but ultimately Tucker and I were laughing at it. It's funny, and I just find it a fascinating way to juxtapose everything else that's in the film, or maybe underline it as well as just encircling all of human experience, maybe.
That is funny. It's also funny because she, after he rolls off her for the first time, she's like, huh, it still works.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Which makes it actually, it's not that moment of sex is maybe the least exploitative in the movie. Like the
Yeah,
characters are
honestly.
on pretty even basis in that neither of them are getting any action aside from each other,
Mhm.
and they kind of know it.
Th- If that's right, and that is like an interesting thing to explore, but I also just want to say how funny it is when Ryusuke, there's this shot of him like peeking out of a barn window.
Actually,
And
oh
like
yes, as Oe, I believe, is the woman who's
Yeah.
been told to sleep with every man in the village. He's like, "Oh boy, it's my turn. It's
Yeah,
my
it's a
turn
great
tonight,
moment.
Because
baby."
he's been peeping on all the other nights.
Yes, yeah. He's
Yeah.
like, "Oh, she's working her way up from the west. So that means that I'm next."
Yeah.
Speaking of Oe, another like funny sex scene is her and that old man who's
Making
like,
just straight up animal noises. And like,
yeah,
just
well,
like,
and before that, she's like, don't pray to it, just fucking have sex with me. And he's like kneeling down before. That's on some of the posters. I believe that's the cover image on Letterboxd as well.
Yes.
Is that frame? And you look at that and you're like, what could this possibly be in the film? And it's like a silly like sex comedy moment, and it's so
Yeah,
it's
I
so
remember thinking to
interesting.
myself at a couple moments, being like, "Huh, this is kind of a sex comedy right now."
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
It's also interesting
Woody Allen would be
because
proud.
Yeah,
yes,
when you first see that shot,
1983 Woody Allen.
it's framed in a very interesting way where you basically like see her thigh on one side of the frame, and, like the rest of her legs at like a triangle, and his face in the middle.
is right. Yeah,
Great framing.
What in the overwhelming majority of sex in the film is not shot with that much like intimacy in terms of
you're not
distance
that close to it, yeah,
No,
at
no,
all.
in terms
I
of the
actually think
distance.
that this is a very intentional thing about this film.
Yeah.
Is that it's all shot very voyeuristically, and even at points, it's not even like, oh, the camera is like voyeurist, like all that kind of hoinky doinky bullshit that we often get on about like sex in movies, but that it literally is POV of a character engaging in voyeurism. And I think that taking it up that step and then being very conscious to shoot every single sex scene in this way really makes it obvious and potent.
Yeah, I think the voyeurism is important, but I also think about of the nature shots. There's a lot of shots of animals having sex. There's
Yes.
two frogs. There's like two
Well,
moths.
it's your great cutaway. You cut away from the sex to something that looks like sex.
Uh-huh.
Well, the thing about it is that is basically framed in a similar way.
Yeah.
Just two creatures, largely in the middle of a frame, having sex.
It is like, I forget who made the comparison. It's a nature documentary.
Yeah.
It's juxtaposed, but it's framed and shot in the same way. Yeah. I wrote down a couple of the same side of the or different sides of the same coin in terms of human and animals. There was the moth sex, as Abram you were talking about. That's when Orin is singing a song about how Tamayan will make a fine daughter-in-law, very clearly indicating like what her intentions are between Tamayan and her son Tatsue. Right before the Amayan family their house is broken into and they're kidnapped and buried and fucking buried alive. We get the owl sort of swooping down and grabbing with some kind of animal related as well.
This that just reminds me of the very opening. Is it the opening scene, or it's close to the beginning in which they're chasing. The group of men are chasing the rabbit,
yeah.
and then they
Yes.
shoot the rabbit, and the hawk comes in, and boom, it just runs off with it. And you know what? That sets the tone for the whole movie. That very moment, and that's how I could tell this is a cynical
The
movie.
movie
Because
also opens with them like running out in the cold and peeing, which is a funny moment of them just going and like peeing, like because they're just super cold and their pants are down.
it just reminded me of that, Tanner.
Yeah. And then the first like moment where they're like wreaking justice, I guess, on the Amiyan family, when they like bury them in potatoes that they've been stealing. Right before that, we see a tanuki, I believe. It's some sort of and it is like breaking into a chicken coop, very clearly trying to be like the father Amiyan stealing essentially.
Yeah.
This is a
Yeah.
very, very Eisensteinian type of
Mhm.
edit going on in this movie. He,
Yes.
it's the same. It is. It's exactly how he does it.
There's also
Yeah.
the one that is very graphic of the snake with
Giving
the
birth.
mouse.
Yeah.
Well, the snake
Oh,
giving
no.
birth, but also with the mouse like
Sure,
halfway
sure.
and out of its mouth.
I like
Yeah.
that the mice and the snake as a nature juxtaposition. In winter, when it's cold and the snake can't move, the mice are nibbling on the snake. But in the
Yeah.
summer, when it's warm and the snake can move, the snake is nibbling on the mouse.
Yeah. I think
It's taking more than a
great thing
nibble.
the great thing about the nature shots that this movie uses is they always feel omnipresent because there's no sequence, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how intimate, that Shohei Imamura will not just randomly cut in the middle of a conversation, in the middle of an action, to just totally unrelated nature. There are often times where it is something that is paralleling, whether that's the animals committing acts of violence or sexual intercourse that are paralleling what the people are doing. But there are also times where it's just like people are having a conversation, they're arguing about something, and you'll still hear the dialogue, and it'll just be like showing a rice field, or like it'll just this is a tree, and I really like that there's this freedom to let the nature sort of creep into the most human elements, the most dialogue heavy scenes of the movie we're never free completely of the fact that nature is all around them, that these people are dependent on nature, and it makes it feel intertwined in a way that where it's not like only when we're outside or only when we're, because the way we see nature or still shots like this in other movies is when we're transitioning between other scenes of human interaction.
Mm-hmm.
A dialogue finishes, we're setting up the next scene, and we haven't gotten to the establishing shot yet, so we're just going to use some reeds or like a bird flying away, or maybe that's the opening to the movie or the closing if you're so inclined. But Joey Imamura is like, it's just going to happen anytime, because nature's everywhere, and we're just going to constantly be like, oh yeah, too bad. I know you want to see this, but here's a shot of the river, and I like that. I like that a lot. It's really what makes this movie filmically distinct.
Yeah. I think I'm kind of tapped out for notes, frankly. I'm spent
not?
a little bit.
Well,
I do have
question.
I do
Where's the
have
question?
con trivia.
I'm
when we wanna
curious
get to
about the
it.
con trivia, but I'm
Okay.
actually curiouser about this question.
So what's bad about the movie?
I was
Let
thinking
me
about
ask you
asking
a
the same
very
thing.
simple question. A very
Mhm.
simple question to you guys. What is bad about this film?
Here's the reason why I don't love this movie. I respect the hell out of it. I have only grown in appreciation for its distinct qualities and distinct construction as we've talked about it. But I'm pretty humanist when it comes to my passion for films. And frankly, looking in at like a little chaos box filled with shitty people makes me feel very distant from the movie. And so while and I think similar to what you were saying earlier, Abram, is I just feel no emotional attachment to this movie. I'm like, that's it artistically interesting that you did this, but I can't say that I love this movie because the reason I watch films is to watch character arcs and to watch development between people and see things come to a close. And this movie is very much so about that high angle lens, and also, and frankly, I think the reason why it just really stays away from me is everyone in this movie is not very likable. Like there are moments where like, okay, they're being funny or like they're doing something maybe kind of sweet, but maybe it's for an ulterior motive. So it just feels very distanced for me, but that's intentional. So Shohei Imamura did a great job at creating the art that he was wanting to, but it definitely lowers my engagement with it, because there was many times where I'm like, yeah, I can probably guess what's coming next. It's probably gonna be another scene of people being shitty and then some nature. So it felt a little bit cyclical to me and pretty emotionally distant.
I'm gonna say that there's like I can't single out anything bad about the movie. So it's just gonna be another one of those where I'm like, yeah, it's a great film. Like it's not going to be one that I hold up as a masterpiece, but it's a great film. It looks fantastic. It is basically perfect for what it's trying to execute. So it's a great film. I'm gonna say there's like I can't single out anything bad about it or anything it doesn't execute on.
I was a little bored. I'll be real. I was a little bored by the film in certain parts, but other parts, like Like I was a little bored while they were walking in the the beginning of climbing the mountain. It's a very slow sequence. But then we get to the graveyard and I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm right back in and I'm there
Mhm.
when I'm thinking about." So, it's a very thought-provoking film, but I agree with Tucker and with Abram that it is emotionally distant and doesn't attempt to play with my feelings, but I do find myself feeling during the film, but a lot of I mean, I'm kind of revulsed by it most of the time. If I'm gonna, my emotional state is not super happy about it. So yeah, I think that somewhere I'm somewhere in between Tanner and the rest of you guys. There's a lot to like about this film, but I think it's not that accessible. I think that we are in a very privileged state here to be able to like dive in and get to this deep level of thinking on it. But we know what we're doing. And so if you were just an everyday person, you might see it and be like, huh, that was interesting. And then you might not think about it anymore and not really get
Yeah.
into why the portrayal of death and why the portrayal of sex and why nature and humanity being combined are actually very important to it as a piece of art. It seems like it's much more on the art scale than the like media scale, I guess.
Well, yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say, Timo, if you're looking for films that are broadly accessible and entertaining, you might be a bit starving.
Don't review the
Palm
Palm Doors.
in the Palm Door selection.
You
There's a
Taxi
couple.
Driver?
There's a couple for you, but not
Pulp
a lot.
Fiction.
Yeah.
Pulp Fiction is one.
Parasite
is another.
Parasite's another.
Check that one off the list already.
Just I'm trying to find it. I don't remember. I guess in one of the pieces I was reading. So
Mhm.
to the person who will never watch this video, but to whom I will also not credit, I apologize. They were saying something effective like the inaccessibility of the film made it so that the Ballad of Narayama was never going to find any kind of mainstream resonance, but it was also not going to find any sort of alternative or art cinema resonance either.
Hmm.
And I think,
Why wouldn't it find art cinema resonance?
well, for what I'm about to say,
Oh, okay,
essentially-
my bad. I thought that was the end of the clause.
Well,
like,
good
wait,
listen-
hold on.
Tucker gets A plus on listening today.
well, that's the end of that's the nugget of what I pulled from this person that I forget the identity of. My feeling for why that is a true sentiment is that the nature footage is not used as effectively as it's used in Don't Look Up, and I think that's really the core of the issue with this film. No, I think that when I'm reflecting on this movie and I'm reflecting on it through the lens of what I hypothesized at the beginning of the review, which is through the lens of the nature documentary, which through the lens of intentionally distancing a sort of humanist lens from our view of these characters. When you do that, it provokes inaccessible but quite provocative conversations like what we're having now. But I think there's also a reason why, if we think about the animal documentary, that there is some sort of wizened, usually British gentleman narrating.
You can say
the
David Attenborough. No, is it Richard or David who does those? I don't know.
David.
One of them's in Jurassic Park. One of them does the nature
Mr.
documentaries.
Attenborough.
Yeah.
is
I think
usually
he's
narrating
an
these.
actual sir. He's a knighted individual.
Sir Blank
It's
Attenborough.
David. It's
is
Sir
narrating
David
these.
Attenborough. It's got to be.
I think it is
David,
David.
I think,
Or Morgan Freeman.
or Morgan Freeman.
You often hear these gentlemen narrating the lives of these animals through
A humanist lens.
through a lens of
Yeah.
ascribing a narrative
Yeah.
and sense of humanly understandable characteristics and behaviors on the animals.
Anthropomorphize.
And if you know how
Star
nature
Fox.
documentaries are made, they're very edited and they're very.
Yes.
You don't see, if you see a chase sequence, you're very unlikely to see the actual same animal running in two different shots. They're
Yeah.
all edited to create narrative and to draw you into the story that we traditionally seek out as humans.
They're also usually, if the subject matter isn't inherently this, the animals are framed in a way to put them into the realm of what I believe is called megafauna, but it could be superfauna, which is essentially animals that we as people project ourselves and our understanding of the world onto. Pandas, penguins, etc.
Uh-huh.
when you don't do that, and you intentionally look at the ultimate superfauna, which is actually people, and you do as much as you can to distance your viewer from a human connection to them, it gets a lot harder to invest yourself in the narrative. And I think the reason why I come into this movie from this more observational, anthropological lens of what is this saying about survival, what are these provocative ideas, is because there is no subjective connection to these characters. I'm not thinking, man, except for these particular moments, which we talked about, I'm not thinking,
Yes.
man, I want to see them survive. I care about them getting through the winter.
Yeah.
I think,
Frankly,
will
it
they
might be
get
more
through the
interesting
winter?
if they died, and
Right.
then we do see the outcome of that.
And so
Frankly, it'd be more interesting if you died. I'm gonna keep it real.
And so that puts this film in a really interesting situation where I think you can look at it formally and look at its intent and say, yeah, this is, to Tanner's point, pretty unimpeachable. But I think you can also say that there's a pretty big subjective reason to be distanced from the film to its disadvantage, because there probably is a more compelling, quote unquote, Ballad of Narayama where I care about the character's survival.
Sure.
But I don't.
Abram,
So I ultimately
it-
think
It might have come out 25 years earlier.
1950, yeah.
Yeah.
it's also funny because I was reading trivia that the Ballad of Narayama was filmed entirely on really convincing backlot sets, and I was watching this movie thinking, man, I
These are
don't even know
really
how they did
convincing.
that. And then I was like, oh, they're talking about the
Yeah.
1958 one. But
Yes.
that's kind of my problem with this film ultimately.
Yeah.
I just don't care. Which sounds bad, but
Took us an hour and change to get to Abram saying, well, ultimately, I just don't
I
care.
don't care. Who cares? Who cares? Well, gentlemen, let me know if you care about this. And this is going to be the 1983 Cannes Film Festival. In doing research for this, by the way, just quick side note, I need to get me some of those Cannes Film Festival posters. They make a poster for every festival, and they look fucking sweet every goddamn time. This year's was like an homage to Akira Kurosawa, and it's like Scribble John, like samurai and giant armor on a horse
cool.
or something like that. It's pretty cool. Anyway, 1983. Let's get to it. The jury president for the main selection of Cannes films this year was William Styron, I believe it is, which I know we're all familiar with, but if the audience isn't, he was an American novelist, best known for his books The Confessions of Matt Turner, and one you might be familiar with the name, Sophie's Choice.
Yeah, see.
Yeah. But it wasn't, well, let's talk about the Sophie's Choice of the films that were in competition.
Okay.
Other notable films of the 22 that were submitted in 1983 include L'Argent by Robert Bresson.
Ah,
Yeah.
I've seen that.
And you know, this is just fun to do. Like, oh, is it, you know, should this have won over The Ballad of Narayama? Yes or no? The King of Comedy by Martin Scorsese.
Another great movie.
Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence by Nasuga Oshima.
Sure.
Tender Mercies by Bruce Beresford.
First one I
And-
haven't seen. Damn.
Yeah.
I thought I was going to go 22 for 22.
And-
Unlikely, though.
Not unlikely. And The Year of Living Dangerously by Peter Weir. And let me get to the jury members. Notable jury members. There wasn't a lot of like names we would recognize, but Sergei Bondarchuk of the Soviet Union is an actor.
Bondarchuk?
Yeah, he actor and director who it appears. I should have known that Timo would know this guy. Actor and director of 1963's War and Peace. We also have Youssef Kahin of Egypt, the first Egyptian jury member in Academy or in Cannes history, excuse me. Who's the director of Cairo Station, and another African director named Suleiman Sise. And as
for
I
them.
said, yeah, good for them. And another, as I mentioned in the last episode, they give out a top 3 for these films. So these films were also in competition, but I wanted to hold them out.
Okay.
So, second place went to, not a film we're going to be familiar with, but I'm going to say it anyway, Courage by Mrunal Sen, which is a Bengali language Indian film. And, Tucker, if you remember what I said earlier about Monty Python, the third place Grand Prix prize went to Monty Python's The Meaning of Life.
No
Oh, I
way.
like
The
that.
Meaning of Life?
It's
Really?
a great movie. That's
Meaning
another
of-
one very obsessed with sex.
Yeah, Meaning of Life was in the official competition at the Cannes Film Festival, and
That's where we
took
get every sperm is
Yeah,
what
and that's
is it?
the one where the guy.
Sacred.
That's the
Sacred,
guy.
yeah.
The parallels are getting too great here. The Meaning of Life ends with a dude choosing his death penalty to be chased off of the cliffs of Dover by a squad
right,
of
yeah.
naked roller derby girls.
Yeah.
Yeah, took home third place at the Cannes Film Festival.
That's
You know what?
awesome. That's awesome.
I love the Cannes Film Festival now.
Yeah.
Okay, sure, Parasite won. All right, that makes sense. But you picked
Mhm.
Meaning of Life as your third place winner in 1983.
Yeah.
That gives you bonus points in my book.
In doing some research, I also found a British news segment from 1983 where they like follow around the Monty Python boys in Cannes, France for like a day.
Oh, that's gotta be
And
funny.
And they're just like they ask him what the movie's about. He's like, we can't tell you what the movie's about because like no one had seen it before. That's it because the film's premiere here at the festival.
Yeah.
So he's like, and they're making jokes. So it's like, well, we tried to make it as accessible as possible so that it's largely targeted at fish. Because there's more fish in the ocean than there is people on Earth or whatever. He says something like that. Being silly and funny, as those Monty Python boys are wont to do.
Why couldn't we review that? Ugh.
Sorry.
Suddenly, I hate this movie. Minus 10 points.
Well, I think it's time to find out what we actually give this movie in pointage. I have the spreadsheet pulled up. I'm thinking, wow, we really came to a pretty great understanding of this film. I think that there is
Oh, yeah.
a lot to really dive into and sink your teeth in if you want to in Ballad of Narayama. Otherwise, you can just kind of watch and be like, slice of life.
Yes.
I don't know. I think
Slice
it's
of
kind of
really
simple.
fucked up life.
Yeah, slice of life. Please, dear God, I don't want to live that. Okay, the scores are ready. In 3, 2, 1.
Ooh.
Well, we are we're pretty close in agreement here. Let me get the
There you go. Yeah, you got it.
the computer to figure out our average. The number is a 7.9, so solidly in second place behind Parasite.
Yes.
The point breakdown was starting at the bottom. Abram gave it a 7.2. I gave it a 7.9. Tanner gave it an 8.2. And then Tucker gave it an 8.3. So, all in all, pretty close. Not as close together as Parasite was, but I think we are much more in agreement about that film. So, there you have it. I don't know. Any final thoughts?
I'm just surprised I gave the highest score.
Yeah.
I mean, I've raised my score a little bit.
So did I.
but
Yeah, I actually did too.
Also, I
during
just give positive scores in general. Like I always scoop positive, so I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, that probably makes sense.
That's the
I
bad.
don't
movie.
think about my scores before I type them in.
Abram lets his fingers. No thoughts enter his brain. He just lets his fingers kind of like scroll along the keyboard and find
Well,
something.
I have a number pad on my keyboard, so I just go
Yeah,
whatever it
And you
hits,
just
it
hope
hits.
that you get a
That's good.
decimal in there too.
yeah.
Well, so far,
Great film.
off to a good start exploring the Palme d'Or winners. I think you know what time it is.
Ain't no way it's that time already, Timo.
Oh yes, way it's time.
Ring a ding ding.
Ring-a-ding-ding.
The
Okay. Ooh,
grandfather clock's going off in the distance. Bing
My
bong,
favorite
bing bong.
grandfather clock sound: ring a ding ding.
It's a modern day grandfather clock.
Oh, hello. All right. Ready, Timo?
Ready.
It's your grandfather's clock.
Wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital? Is it on real? Wheel, what's your deal?
And the number is 66.
Ooh.
So which
Number 66 will actually get us a movie that we have all heard of from a director that we have heard of, starring actors that we've heard of. This is a movie starring Steve Buscemi, Tony Shalhoub, Judy Davis, John Goodman, John Turturro, directed by Joel Cohen. We will be watching Barton Fink.
Barton Fink.
All right. Have any of us seen this? I haven't seen this.
Mm-mm.
Nope.
All
Those are my
right.
straggling cones that I need to
Yeah.
watch.
No, is it only Joel? You said
It's only Jill. Ethan
Interesting.
wasn't
Did you give us a year for this one, Tucker?
Ethan wasn't born yet.
born yet. 1991.
1991.
Okay.
So on this list, the higher the number, the newer the film.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's all arbitrary anyway. It's a random number. It doesn't fucking matter.
But The higher the number,
see.
the newer the movie.
Oh, I see. It doesn't matter.
I have
It's
seen 14
random.
Joe Cohen movies. This is the most popular movie I haven't seen. It's 13th on his list.
Very interesting.
I'm pretty sure the only Coen Brothers movie I've seen is No Country for Old Men.
Well, good thing this is in a Coen Brothers movie.
Sorry,
Coen
Coen
brother.
Brother
A Cohen
Coen
Bra
brother.
movie.
That's what he called himself. But he's like, oh, people are like, that doesn't make any sense. He's like, I have a brother.
All
Written
right.
by Joel and Ethan Coen, of
Yes,
course.
Yeah, written.
Whew!
Yeah.
Thank God. Thank God.
That's crazy that is zygote.
Cinematography? Who else? Daddy Deacons.
Ooh, yes. Well, we're in luck because we're in Japan. We're in the foreign country. Now let's talk about what we really like. Hollywood.
We dipped our toe.
We dipped
know,
a
we
toe.
got
Now
it.
we're back into the kiddie pool of Hollywood.
We've yet to get statistical anomaly. We've yet to get a French film.
Yeah.
But we did get an American film.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you guys for enlightening me about this film, and hopefully our audience as well. If you liked the video or think that we're wrong, write a comment and describe how our interpretation of the Ballad of Narayama falls flat in numerous categories. I'm sure you can come up with some, but
Don't tell him
Yes.
to do that. What are you you're just fishing for bad comments at that point. We already get
If
enough
you
without
want
saying
to,
anything.
that-
if you want
Yeah.
to, but you can write whatever you want.
You
Free
can
will,
say a nice thing as well.
yes.
If you think we're young and stupid and too woke, let us know in the comments below.
Everyone already did
Any
anyway.
of the words that were going to be in your comment just came out of Abram's mouth, just don't comment. Just
We've
we got
heard
it.
it-
We
we've heard it
know that
already.
we know everything there is. We've heard it all. Okay, we get it.
I kind of want the engagement.
So
Okay, that's fair.
until
we barely
until
get any
next
comments.
week, in which we talk about Barton Fink, stay warm, keep cool, and peace. Hey everybody, we're gonna upset the gods of random chance a little bit here and not watch Barton Fink next week. Don't fear, it'll be back the week after, but instead we are going to review a film that's currently in theaters that we would all like to see in theaters and should be talked about within a timely manner. That would be this year's Palme d'Or winner, Anatomy of a Fall. It's finally available to watch here in the States, and we want to check it out and give you guys our opinions. So while Barton Fink, it's still on the pipeline, we are going to be talking about Anatomy of a Fall next week, and who knows? We'll see what we think of it. So stay tuned here, and we'll catch you later.